It's Ace's birthday, so the Doctor calls for a holiday. Terngaian's New Byzantium offers an ideal spot with hedge gardens, markets and festivals. Yet when Ace follows a desperate man being chased to his death, the TARDIS crew soon realise that something is replacing people in New Byzantium. While the Doctor, Benny and Ace hitch a ride to the planet Arden to seek the source of these duplicates, and indeed the culprits who stole the TARDIS, large kilns are slowly massing on Arden's surface. Who's really behind these duplicates? Where do they come from, and who exactly can you trust to be real? Hello, and welcome back to Too Broad and Too Deep, the Doctor Who podcast where we talk about the Virgin new adventures from Time Worm Genesis all the way through to the dying days. I am Anthony, and I'm joined as always by Alasdair.
Hello Anthony, how are we doing?
I am doing not too bad, even better for we have a guest to get us through this coming book. We have our swell commenter, Jason Miller. How are you doing?
Guys, I am so happy to be here, but I have to say that as a native New Yorker in the United States, whose voice sounds much like the Empire State Building tour guide in The Chase, I'm feeling very inadequate next to your lovely Scottish accents, so please forgive my horrible vocal stylings next to you guys.
Oh, wait, well, we have a very international audience and very international guests as well. So we'd love to have variations of all accents coming onto this podcast at any time.
Absolutely.
Indeed. So joining us indeed is Jason for what is, I believe, Christopher Bulis' debut Doctor Who novel, Shadowmind. Now, before going into that, I was wondering, Jason, what has been your history with the Virgin New Adventures? Is it something that you, in the 90s, were getting over to America to be poring over the pages, or has this been something later in life for you?
Oh no, for me the New Adventures I was there from day one and from ground zero. In the States, Doctor Who was a niche thing, it was a cult thing, it was not part of every child's experience, obviously. You have a network of PBS stations. I was very lucky in the New York City area growing up in the suburbs. I had access to 5 different PBS stations that were all showing different cycles of Doctor Who at different times. So I discovered the show in November 1984. I'm 11 years old. My very first episode was Time Flight Part 1. And yet I'm still here over 40 years later. So imagine that. They were showing the Peter Davison episodes 25 minutes every night at 7 p.m. So within a couple of months, I got to Caves of Androzani Part 4. Then they cycled back because the Colin Baker season had not first aired on the BBC, so they cycled back to Robot, and I spent the better part of 1985 watching Tom Baker, one episode, one night, 25 minutes at a time. But through all the other stations in the area, I was able to see all in 1985, the John Pertwee years, and then the Hartnell and Troughton package came to PBS in September 1985. So within 12 months, when they started showing Twin Dilemma and Attack of the Cybermen on PBS, I had seen each of the first 6 Doctors in my 12 months of fandom, which is great because in the UK, you didn't have access to all that variety in the States. I was watching all 6 Doctors over the course of a year. So it was a crash course in fandom. I was 11 going on 12, and I discovered the novelizations at about the same time. My very first novelization was Logopolis, which I read my friend's copy of, and the first one that I owned myself was The Invasion of Time. So I was discovering about all these past Doctors along the way and putting Doctor Who's continuity together in my head as an 11 and 12-year-old. So fast forward to 1990, I want to say, when the novelization of Survival comes out. I was not in touch with fandom. I'm a teenage kid in the States. I did not have Doctor Who magazine. This is before I joined the internet. A very primitive time, 1990. So the first time I became aware that Doctor Who had been canceled was Peter Darvill Evans' afterword to the novelization of Survival, where he says, we're running out of new Doctor Who to adapt, and there's not going to be any more new Doctor Who, so we're going to start with our own original stories. And I said to myself, wow, that sounds like a terrible idea, which is probably, of all the most incorrect things ever said, that's got to be in the top 10. So now, flash forward to 1991. I am just about to turn 18. I am a freshman in college or university, as you would say here in the States. And I had learned that Doctor Who fandom in America was not cool, so I decided to hide my fandom. And I said, what's cooler than Doctor Who? I know, Star Trek. So I decided to show up as a freshman in college as a Star Trek guy with predictable results. But my first week on campus, there was a sale. There was a poster and photo sale. Buy cool swag to decorate your dorm room. And there was this box of glossy, like 4x6 photos taken from different TV series. I'll have no idea how this got there, but there was a random glossy photograph from Death to the Daleks Part 2 in this box. So it's John Pertwee and John Abineri talking to a Dalek. So I put this little picture on my dorm room wall under all the Star Trek and under the pinup photo of Winona Ryder and whatever else was going on in 1991. And there was one other kid in my dorm who recognized the Doctor Who photo, and we became rapid friends. He discovered the first two new adventures. His name was Rich. He discovered Time Worm Genesis and Time Worm Exodus in a local bookstore off campus. And he hoovered them up, and he was telling me how excited he was by both books. So when I was home for Thanksgiving break in November 1991, I went to the bookstore, and there they were, Genesis and Exodus together. Bought them both, read them on the train ride back down from New York to college. Finished both books, I think, together in a matter of 3 days, and I was just energized because I had been reading, novelizations for years, but I had never read a full-length 250-page Doctor Who novel with the sort of continuity references that only a fan like me could understand and love. So I realize now this is a minority opinion, but I really love Time Worm Genesis, as a 17, 18-year-old, and I really loved Exodus. So the next step was to discover the internet. So April 1992, I discovered Rec Art's Doctor Who on Usenet, quickly signed up, became a regular poster. Rec Art's Doctor Who was ground zero for the NAs for the next several years because, now in 2025, you are spoiled for choice. You can watch every episode of Doctor Who ever, either on your iPlayer or on your VPN access to the iPlayer. Or in America, you have the entirety of the classic series on Tubi and most of the classic series on YouTube. You can watch Doctor Who whenever you want, old series, new series. There's Blu-rays, there's DVDs, there's audio there's audio recordings of the old episodes that are missing. You have Big Finish, which basically records one story a day. And if you want to buy the entire Big Finish catalog, you better win a couple of lottery tickets first. Yeah. In 1992, the only Doctor Who going was the New Adventures. So on Rec Arts, we congregated. Every book was discussed ad nauseum every month. Every release date was a big matter of excitement. And when Love and War came out, it blew everybody's minds that no one knew that a Doctor Who book could be this good. So for several months, everybody's signature file said, read Love and War, signposting you. Now, access to the books was spotty, so I read Genesis, I read Exodus, I read Apocalypse. After that, it was 9 months before I found Witchmark, which not quite as good as the first few. Then I found Love and War. When I was home from college for a weekend for my kid sister's bat mitzvah. I stayed up all night reading Love and War, and I was half asleep for her big important ceremony the next day, but that's how good it was. So I became a regular reader at that point, and I guess that comes to Shadowmind, which comes out in July 1993. I moved off campus for my junior year of college, so it was me and two of my friends rented an off-campus apartment, and I was the first one to arrive, so I had the apartment to myself, and all I had was this tiny little 13-inch TV/VHS combo. But I had the cassette tape of Curse of Fenric with all the deleted scenes added back in, and I had the novelization of Shadowmind, August 1993. So for the 2 days that I had the apartment to myself, I was watching Curse of Fenric quite a bit, and I read Shadowmind cover to cover. So the New Adventures took me from freshman in college in 1991 to almost my last year of law school in 1997. You can trace my entire adolescence and evolution to what New Adventure was out that particular month. And thanks to Rec Arts, I was able to meet a lot of the authors who came there and were posting and were announcing their new books. It was a tremendously exciting time, and there's almost no substitute for it today. I don't think it's impossible to have that kind of experience in 2025. It was great times.
Very much, aye. And that idea, that you came into university masking yourself as a Star Trek fan. I think that's maybe what Christopher Bulis might have done to get into the Virgin publishing office, perhaps, as well. But when it comes to that idea, I was curious when you're saying there about the access to them as well, in particular, like when it dried up after about 9 months or so. Where was it that you were accessing them? But did shops actually sell them per se, or were they just perhaps online, dealings taking place to try and get copies?
Once I started reading the books in 91, but I became an addict when Love and War came out. At that point, I was in Baltimore. I was, towards the edge of the city-county line, but Baltimore's Inner Harbor. And if you're familiar with the TV series Homicide or The Wire, that's where that takes place. I would take the number 3 bus down from campus to the Inner Harbor. There was a big shopping mall, which went out of business during COVID. And they had a Barnes & Noble on the top floor. And that store was very good about stocking the New Adventures. So between 1993 and 95, I was able to get the books pretty much a month or two after they came out. When I moved to the Midwest for law school, access became much more difficult. So at that point, my online friends from Rec Arts started buying the books and mailing them to me every month. And I would send them, the $6 check plus shipping. So by the time 96, 97 rolls around, I'm about a year behind schedule. So I didn't finish reading the books, even though Longbarrow comes out in 97. I didn't finish the line until 98.
But it's always interesting tracking how the systems were, because, as much as fandom talks about with the series itself and how people watched it, like you said, with PBS and things like that in America, ironically, American fans had more access than UK fans in that way. There was always that exchanges of different tapes, different things like that, but it was still going through in the 90s, of especially for some of the literature that was continuing the books in the 90s, for fans who were not wholesale perhaps getting them as the range went on in the years. And yeah, it's always fascinating hearing that and how they're still keeping the flame alive in that spirit even a decade after that method of mailing tapes to everyone and such. But yeah, that brings us on to, I guess, this book of Shadowmind. And this was thankfully not one you needed to send a check away to wait a year for.
No, I bought this one in Baltimore in the old Barnes & Noble.
Yeah.
The book came out in July 93. I would have had it at the end of August when I moved off campus. So I read it about a month to 6 weeks after its street date.
Nice. And yeah, so I'll be honest, this is my first time reading it. Alasdair, was this one at the time that
I was still
had read? Or?
No, I missed this one entirely. I was still deeply ensconced in village life, and getting up to Glasgow was a chore, and you picked and chose what ones you were picking up, and nothing about the book appealed to me. Not the cover, not the blurb. It was like, no, I think I'm going to pass in this one. And having just reread it for the first time, having just read it for the first time ever, I think I made the right call. It's
Well, this is the thing. Everyone says that about how the book looks, and I agree. I'm not a big fan of how it looks, but the blurb did intrigue me, because not so much about all this thing about Ten Gaia and how it's spelt on the back and the misprint that's on the blurb, but the other name on it, which is Ardennes, because this is hyper local Glasgow patter, but Ardennes is an area in the south side of Glasgow, and I was like, Why is the Doctor going to Ardennes? It's a wee bit of it's not exactly where I would go to, let alone like a Time Lord would go to. So yeah, I was intrigued just from the reference of Ardennes, thinking, is this based in any way about about that place? Not to say that's not the only Scottish reference in this book. One of the characters, I think, for the second book in a row, is a reference to Stirling in this book, with one of the characters being called Stirling, and the last one being written in Stirling Library. So we've got one Scottish thread to weave through this book.
There's also a unnamed Scottish engineer who may or may not be a Scotty analogue.
Who's in a red jumper, I believe.
The phrase "maybe" is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Yeah. Oh, but yes. So yes, that you did pick up thankfully at the time. Unfortunately, you picked it up now, Alasdair. I guess we'll just maybe open with some opening thoughts about it. Yeah, I'll kick off a wee bit, perhaps just on how I felt, because I have just finished reading it about an hour ago. That is perhaps conducive as to how I was finding reading it, because I was struggling to finish it. Just in terms of as nice ideas I found in it, the prose style and the very descriptive and sometimes overly descriptive and sometimes meandering style, I could not get through it in a lot of ways. Not to say this is one that I want to write off completely. No. There are ideas I do want to praise. I think there are good, solid ideas. I think they are wasted because there's too many characters crammed around and too much descriptions throughout. But yeah, it's not. It's a very interesting place to be. That this has been the longest one to read for me out of all of the books so far. And it's, I think, the shortest book we've had in the range so far in terms of page numbers.
Yeah. I didn't hate it. There were some really, really nice ideas in there. It just didn't come to life for me. I just couldn't get into it. And there were some brilliant ideas in there. The idea of duplicates being piloted by little small aliens. They used that in Men in Black a few years later, and it worked. It went down an absolute treat. It's a great idea. It's cloning vats. Okay, that's nice wee shadows of Lungbarrow coming up. There's lots of nice ideas, and I think I'd like to see what Bulis would do with it now. I think as a first book, it's maybe struggled a wee bit, but I would like to see what he would do with it now. If he would polish it a wee bit, if he would streamline it a wee bit. Yeah, I wanted to enjoy it. There was parts where I thought, oh, I'm going to like this, but then it just didn't quite take. I think it's probably the best way of putting it.
I'm going to agree with Alasdair, and I'll backtrack a little bit. So in 1993, again, the New Adventures are the only game in town. Yes. There is no new Doctor Who being made on TV. There is no Big Finish. There is the monthly comic strip in DWM, but I was not a subscriber, so I wouldn't have been aware of that until the trade paperback compilations came out years later. If you wanted new Doctor Who in July 1993, Shadowmind is the only place you're going to get it. I am 19 years old. I am not nearly as well read as I like to think that I am now. So I was a little more accepting of the sometimes difficult prose. There's a lot of typos in this book and the embarrassing surfeit of characters. But let's defend that. Let's say that what makes the New Adventures great, what makes the New Adventures unique, is also the thing that 30 years later makes them a little bit harder to get into as a fan. You're talking about a shoestring operation. You've got Peter Darvill Evans as your commissioning editor. I'll say that again. Peter Darvill Evans as your commissioning editor. You've got a very young Andy Bodle as his assistant. I don't know who else was in the office, but I gather it was a very, very, very small operation. And yet they're putting out, starting in 1993, starting in February, they go from a bi-monthly series to a monthly series. They're putting out 11 books in 1993. Assuming an average length of 250 pages, that is about 3,000 pages of Doctor Who fiction a year, and you basically have 2 or 3 people editing them and commissioning them as you go. It is not an operation with a lot of money to spend, so you are not bringing in big-name authors to write the new adventures. Yes, Terrance Dicks, age 61, comes back and he writes Time Worm Genesis. John Peel is living in New York in the suburbs in his late 30s. He is faxing his pages back from Kinko's to Ladbroke Grove every couple of days. He actually told me that story. Everybody else who writes for the line is in their early 20s. Paul Cornell is 23 when he writes Time Worm Revelation. Lance Parkin, when he writes Just War, is 23 years old. Kate Orman, I think, was 24 when she got commissioned for Left-Handed Hummingbird, which is coming up for you in a few months. For the most part, everybody who writes for the series in 1993 is a first-time author. These are young, hungry writers, and a lot of these books suffer from first novel syndrome, and it is very obvious that Shadowmind is first novel syndrome. Every idea that Christopher Bulis ever had is in this book. There are tons of characters, introduced 7 or 8 to a chapter. Everything on the planet Arden is a reference to Shakespeare, and one of the characters talks about the pre-atomic writer from Earth who named all these places, and that's a very subtle reference to Shakespeare. There's the Star Trek reference to the Scottish engineer on page 109. If you had a more robust editing system in place, and if you had fewer first-time authors, this book could be refined if there was the time and if there was the space. You could say, look, introduce one character per chapter. Nicola Bryant said on one of the big finishes that she directed that having too many characters in a script is a sign that the author doesn't know how to tell his story. A strong editing team could have knocked out 20 characters from this book and made it leaner and meaner. But what's great about the NAs is they don't have that infrastructure in place. They're giving the first-time author the space to write a book with minimal editing, and all the typos prove it. And how many authors from the NAs go on to bigger and better things? Several of them write for the TV series. One of them showruns the TV series to this day, Russell T Davies. Christopher Bulis wrote 10 other books after this one, and you can't tell the story of Doctor Who in the wilderness years without Christopher Bulis. So there is a lot to enjoy about this book in spite of the prose and the characters and the pacing. And I realize that sounds like a backhanded compliment. But have you guys thought about what the influences for this book are? Because there's a lot of influences here that I found that are really interesting.
Yeah, I think that there are certain influences within this that we have, I think, talked about the big one there mainly because that's the bits I maybe struggled with because there was quite a lot of it in terms of Star Trek, in terms of just, where and I think Christopher Bulis talks about this in some interviews about, like, he essentially wanted to correct the idea of how you do a space battle. So he decided to do many space battles and such within this, and to show, how Star Trek ought to do it. But I think at that time, I don't know if that was probably the best time because, TNG was nearing its end and was at such a strong place. I think DS9 was the same thing. Like, there's the world of Star Trek even seems to have changed from what issues perhaps Christopher Bulis had when he initially started writing about this in, earlier 90s, when he started kind of working on it. That for me was the kind of more prevalent influence. I think that kind of coloured some thoughts about this. Like the whole duplicate plot is an interesting one. That again, with, I was going to say Terror of the Velvets. Oh, my mind is so bad at Christmas. What am I thinking of? Dave the Triffid? No, it's not Dave the Triffid. I can't remember my things right now because I'm running on I'm running on Christmas brain and my references are not there. But basically, the idea of duplicates and it's not a novel idea in that way, but the use of it I think could have been really unique in the Doctor Who sense in this book. Again, it was, I think, just coloured because of all the ideas kind of permeating through of needing to do space battles or needing to do this or that. Because I didn't feel as much tension of, say, for example, the plot line about Ace being a duplicate later in the book, given that she had faced damage and such like that. Or indeed, how you would, you know, feel that experience, almost quite out of body experience of having someone you know like that. There was a lot of missed points of tension that you could use with some of these influences that he had, because, yeah, I'm not sure whether he wanted to just talk about these ideas in the form of writing them in a book, or whether he wanted to explore his own way of doing it, like, say, in the battle side that we talked about.
One of the things that I've learned in 2025, and I'm learning this the hard way past 50 years old, there is no such thing as an original idea. This year, in order to cope with the political situation in America, I have been going to the movies a lot. And this year there was a Kurosawa Film Festival playing in Lower Manhattan, not too far from my office. So I saw a lot of Kurosawa movies for the first time. I did not know between 1977 and 2025 that the cantina scene in the original Star Wars is taken word for word and shot for shot from Yojimbo. I've also been watching a lot of John Wayne movies, my apologies, but the movie Rio Bravo was written by the same person who wrote Empire Strikes Back, and
love Rio Bravo.
Also, the audio commentary on my Library D of Rio Bravo, the audio commentator is John Carpenter, who took ideas from Rio Bravo for The Thing. There is a lot of The Thing in this book, because the idea of duplicates infiltrating civilization, not quite as violent as the John Carpenter version of The Thing, but you have to assume Christopher Bulis would have seen it, and it's in the back of his mind. And then later on, when one of the furry little creatures bursts out of the duplicate's chest, come on, that has to be Alien. There's no way you write that scene without thinking of Alien. In terms of techno thrillers, who are the guys who are moving a lot of book product in the early 90s? Tom Clancy and Clive Cussler. So a lot of the techno stuff in this book, the battles, the description of the weaponry, and the ships and the dogfights in space, you have to assume Bulis was reading at least Tom Clancy, if not Clive Cussler, at the same time. In terms of Doctor Who stories, you have, this basically is the web planet. You have these indigenous, mindless alien creatures being taken over by a malign alien brain. Animus, Umbra. Animus. So web planet may well have been in there. And then the idea of Umbra using shadows to give itself corporeal form, and the shadows are spreading over the surface of the planet. I get a lot of the abominable snowmen in there, the idea of the great intelligence taking on physical form and taking over the mountain in Snowdonia. I mean, Tibet. That weird area of Tibet where there is no snow. So those are all the influences that I thought I saw in this book. Maybe I'm giving Bulis a little too much credit. And of course you have all the Shakespeare place names too. Arden, Titania, Oberon. Bulis has a lot to say, and because it's his first novel, he's saying all of it in the same place. But for me, reading this for a second time, and I had no recollection of the ending at all. I remembered a lot of this. I remembered Talavera. I remembered Kausama as characters. I definitely remembered Santoni, because 1993 was also the year that I discovered the movie The Godfather. And who's the best character in The Godfather? James Caan's sonny, Santino. Santoni, it's the same name. I was picturing James Caan as Santoni in this book in 1993. And it works a lot better. And there's also a character named Del Rey. Del Rey has to be a reference to Lester Del Rey, the legendary sci-fi author and editor, who coincidentally died right before the book came out. So these are all things that kept me going as I read it for the second time. Yeah, the pacing is off, too many characters, the prose isn't great, it's a first novel. But trying to spot all these references kept me going, and kept me going right until the last page.
Yeah, no, definitely things like the influences that he does wear in his sleeve, be it, you know, that Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's what I was trying to remember earlier. I don't know why it's escaped my brain. That's what I was trying to say, but I just couldn't remember. Yeah, like the idea and the tension of knowing who's actually real or such like that. It did not last as long, perhaps, as it. Oh, and it kind of had like a. I don't know if anyone's been watching The War Between the Land and the Sea.
Not yet.
Out here, but they have a thing in it where they can basically very quickly diagnose something that typically would be a big like tension point that you'd build up to for like the subterfuge sort of thing, and it just is diagnosed like that. there was a little bit of that near certain points, like tension points of needing to find out who the duplicates may be within chambers, or later on in the book as well, finding out what material's made of, things like that. But I think what he does well is creating things that could be solid ideas, and like you say, that the shadow form. We've always quite flippantly thought that different ideas from different books, that even as terrible as books can be, like say Transit, we thought was things that the new series folk have ripped off in the past, like the Partings of the Ways. I think we were saying was ripped off from the end of Transit, with the Doctor kind of getting all the energy and all of that. In this as well, like I do wonder about, say, the Vashta Narada, with that shadow form, subsuming everyone. It goes in and kind of just subsumes everything. The Doctor's wife with that sort of sentient planet, controlling people as well.
Rings of Akaten as well.
I like to think that Stephen Moffat, the Rings of Akaten, Stephen Moffat has a thing for Shadowmind a bit. He's read that and be like, there's a few ideas I can put in my series.
It's also was it the Tesselecta in the 11th Doctor's era, piloted by little people.
Yes.
Same kind of idea. Listen, this book did not lack for ideas. Ideas is not something I'm going to criticise this book for. It's plenty of really good, solid ideas. Yeah,
it was just most of some of the styling, some of the way that the action is described, but also I guess even some of the characters. I had this thought since about near the beginning of the book, where there's a scene with the Doctor being like furiously studying the TARDIS, and Benny and Ace come in going, what's happening here? And Benny briefly sees the Seventh Doctor as the First Doctor for some reason. I have a mild theory that actually stuck in a lot of the characterization of the First Doctor stuck with the Seventh Doctor in this book, because there's so much of how he talks that is not quite naturally what I think to be the Seventh Doctor. There's a lot of or young boy or things like that the Seventh Doctor says in this book is just dialogue, and it's not dialogue I naturally hear McCoy saying, perhaps. Some scenes definitely, yes, but there were some parts where it did feel we were having some sort of like Freddy Jaeger trying to fight with his inner heart, no spirit, like in the Savages sort of thing, where there was some heartnalisms coming through in a way, and I can kind of get that for what he maybe wanted to draw the series to be, which was, especially in those first few chapters, quite a wholesome book, quite a relaxing, everyone's kind of getting on sort of environment. That I also felt was a nice idea that perhaps didn't quite last throughout the book, but again was one of those nice ideas from the characterization of our main crew that I enjoyed.
So Anthony, you raise a really good point about the way the New Adventures used past Doctors, especially in the first couple of years of the book, because I'm sure you guys have discussed this. Time Warp Genesis, the Seventh Doctor calls the Third Doctor up to do some technical stuff that he's not adept in at the end of the book. Time Worm Apocalypse starts with a flashback to the Second Doctor and Polly at the very beginning of Patrick Troughton's range. Time Worm Revelation has all the past Doctors in it, and I don't know if it was Chris Bulis' idea to have a William Hartnell cameo, or if that was put on him by the editors, because there are a couple of lines in this book that were clearly written by Peter Darvill Evans to tie in to the previous and the subsequent story arcs coming on after this one. But the early New Adventures would do a lot of playing around. If you have people who didn't love the Seventh Doctor but wanted to read Doctor Who, you have other glimpses of other Doctors in as many books as possible to keep the people happy. What's interesting is that Bulis' second book comes out the next year, 1994, when the Missing Adventures range launches. And his second book is a Sixth Doctor book called State of Change. But in that book, the Sixth Doctor unregenerates back, and you have each of the 5 previous Doctors get a couple of pages in the book. So Bulis, I think, likes the idea of having different doctors in his book, and he ends up writing for each of the first 8 TV doctors before he finishes writing books entirely in the early 2000s. So it's not necessary for the plot, but it is kind of a nifty idea.
Yeah, and it's so as we've seen before, it works to various extents. I mean, it was quite jarring when John Peel did it in the Time Worm series, and it was a thing of beauty when Cornell did it. Come Revelation, they all manage it to various extents, and I am a sucker for previous Doctors. And as much as I didn't enjoy the first Time Worm book, I loved the Third Doctor being called up to pilot the TARDIS. I know you weren't a fan, Anthony, but we're going to disagree in that one. But I don't think it really served any distinct purpose here other than the Doctor's really old and feels sad. And it's...
Yeah.
Once again, I get what he was trying to do, but it felt a wee bit heavy-handed. The Doctor's sad and wants to cheer himself up.
Yeah. I think it was almost like a state of intent of what Christopher Bulis wanted the Doctor to be, and it was to be harkened back to those days in terms of the tone of what the Doctor was like, in terms of, like, this is what I was saying with the dialogue, but in terms of what the tone was like with the companions, because there's a level of almost like the Romans when they're just cutting around Rome for like that first bit of the first episode and whatever, and that's what it felt like here. They were just having a nice time for Ace's birthday for the first few chapters, and I actually just was enjoying the company of the TARDIS team, and they were enjoying each other's company, and it's so rare for Ace in particular in this to be talking in a way that's like she just had a nice day and she's having a lovely time, and it then makes it more of a stake for her to then go through ordeals because you've built something nice up for someone who typically doesn't get nice things. And yeah, I find that quite endearing in terms of the build-up of Ace, and I think she's probably the best character in this book. Indeed, she is the most active and most consistent character I find in this book. She's not the most angriest, standoffish Ace, but she still is. She's not the Ace of the TV show. She's still sleeping with folk on the spaceship. She is still, very much gun-toting and uses that to her best ability. But she's not being super angsty about things as much as that's what previous books have been building up to her to be even more. This one just kind of has an evolved Ace from the TV show, and I appreciated that character the most, I think. And
there's, I think, maybe just 2 incidents of gratuitous nakedness from her, so...
I think maybe 3. I counted. There was maybe I think brief third one with the helmet, the Dalek helmet, at some point.
Also, towards the end, when Kim Talavera is recovering in the Shen's underground nest, Ace is talking to her, and they're both naked, and the author makes clear to
thank you,
point that out.
Yeah, that was
what I like about the New Adventures is it's very author directed, so the way the Doctor and the companions are portrayed can vary wildly from book to book. So if you don't like a book, wait 2 months and it'll just be done differently. I just listened to your guys' episode on Lucifer Rising, and of course that's the book where the Doctor kills one of the main villains with his own hands towards the end of the book, and that was the book that sort of wraps up the new Ace original story arc. She's reintroduced in Deceit very angry, and in Lucifer Rising we find out why, and that sort of wraps up. Then White Darkness is very consciously a first Doctor historical, where the Doctor takes the brooch that Kameka gave him in the Aztecs and starts wearing it again. So that's David A. McKinty saying, I'm going to do a Hartnell historical, and there's going to be no science fiction at all, except maybe this thing is kind of sort of Cthulhu. So the Doctor in this book is not the dark, manipulative 7th Doctor that he was in many previous New Adventures. Here he's much more of an advisor, an eccentric figure. He can take over a room, and he's there to give advice and observe, but he's not, with one exception, he's not getting very physically active in the plot at all. He's more of the Hartnell brain sitting off to the side while younger people do all the heavy lifting. What I had forgotten about is how dark the last 10 pages are when Ace has to, spoiler alert for 32-year-old book, Ace has to physically kill a lot of the quote-unquote Enterprise/Broadsword crew members, including the captain, because they've been taken over by Umbra, and it's either her or them, and she hates it, but she has to kill a good amount of named characters, and she's very upset about it on the last couple of pages. And the Doctor says, I need a vacation from both of you, which sets up the very next two books, Birthright and Iceberg, which are a duology. So I don't know if the idea to have Ace kill half the cast in the last 2 pages and be angry about it was Christopher Bulis' idea or Peter Darvill Evans' idea. But it's a very nice, friendly book until those last 10 pages. And the tonal shift is a little weird.
There are so many characters. I mean, that's the thing. When I'm saying that she is consistent with who her character is, because Ace, this is a different Ace. This is an evolved Ace that is a soldier and would, when push comes to shove in situations like this, does kill people. Does not mean that she is maybe as gloating as we've seen her in things like Deceit, for example. Perhaps so that there's a bit more kind of contrition towards that. I guess it's an idea that if it was something directed by Peter Darvill Evans to put in to cause, some form of tension, it is something that is very consistent with Christopher Bulis' idea of the Doctor, because the fact it's the Doctor wanting to step away from the companions it shows that these people that we have grew and evolved for these books, just the book range itself, are too much for what he conventionally feels of as the Doctor, with his characterization of him as a more sort of stoic and sort of character, more traditional sort of character than we're perhaps used to. Even though that the Seventh Doctor in this is one who, he gives his chance to say, we need to, let this creature grow within, not without, and then learn, and then when it doesn't work, he's like, oh yeah, that's fine, just blow it up, maybe, or get rid of it, that's fine, that's okay now, I gave it a chance. Which is perhaps more in line with either later Doctors or,
Very David Tennant, I was going to say. You get one chance.
Yes. Yeah, one chance. Yeah, exactly. The whole thing of like telling it to be a good little boy, it wasn't exactly sort of like the Doctor Dances Empty Child sort of thing of go to your room, sort of a cliffhanger to work with, I guess, but it was trying to play on that in a way. Again, another influence that Stephen Moffat has perhaps gained from Shadowmind, but yeah, I think it was an interesting idea that the Seventh Doctor, I don't say capitulated, but he did at least not just immediately go for the gun like he maybe did in St. Lucifer Rising. He does have that sort of, he gives it a chance. He thinks morally, can it grow within? It can. Okay. And
can we take a second to appreciate how uncomfortable the Doctor discussing military hardware was? Oh, this gun will do this. Oh, that gun will do that. I'm going to put on combat fatigues. It's like, sorry, what? And it led to a really nice moment where he still tries to pull his hat up and say, hello, I'm the Doctor, in full military garb. But apart from that, it was like, that was really, really jarring. The Doctor shouldn't be dressed up like a soldier. Just for the benefit of the tape, I'm moving my hands about madly.
Yeah, exactly. It felt like there was an issue with how the Doctor ought to react to being put, say, in military garb or being stuck with a gun or things like that. Because I don't want to be him to be like full Hartnell in like the Gunfighters and just like holding a gun like that or whatever. But there was a kind of ground level of the Doctor's, caution with militarism. Yeah, oh yeah, the Doctor's kind of like, how he operates with everyone around him, and how
and this is why I was thinking it's like a more traditional adventure, how unassuming the Doctor seems to be slotted into that situation. Like there's particular comments made throughout it being like, we just kind of trusted him. He just seems like a guy we would trust. Like it's kind of something that we don't see as much. There's usually some form of like caution, even in traditional Doctor Who storytelling, before you get to the point of trust being earned. He's locked up for episode 2, whatever. But he just kind of is brought in, is trusted immediately by all these characters, both in...
There's even a moment where they say, yes, I quite like him. Oh, good, I'm glad you think so too. And it's like, they acknowledge that they shouldn't. And it was a really nice moment. I liked it, Anthony, I'd have to agree with you.
Yeah, it was just kind of different, I guess. I was not kind of used to that, perhaps, because I was just assuming the traditional untrusting people, especially given their connections to a murder scene that had happened, but they are just very much taken into confidence in a way that I guess was for efficiency of storytelling, but there's about a dozen characters that could have been removed to have made that efficient storytelling, and have that traditional sort of earning of trust.
Now, just when we're on the murder scene, I want to see if you guys read this the same way I did. The guy that was murdered in the murder scene, did you get the impression that was Ace going gung-ho and blowing everything up, and he was kind of taken out? Because that's how I read it.
Yes.
Right, good. It wasn't just me.
The way the explosions were thrown over it, I was like, no one is surviving this, like, sort of part of Hermes. Like, why is she... Yeah. I was surprised that anyone did, but...
Yes,
every couple of books raises the ante as to what weaponry Ace is carrying on her. Like, she had the Nitro 9 marbles in Time Worm Genesis, and now 2 years later she has edible Nitro 9. You put it in your mouth like a candy to activate it, and then it goes from white to red, and then you throw it. But if you swallow it, it doesn't harm you.
Yeah, like your stomach acid reacts that quickly as it goes down your gullet. I'm like, okay, that's a very fast-acting sort of acid reflux you must have. Like,
I mean, I don't think we see that particular brand of Neo Nitro again in the New Adventures, unless I'm forgetting something.
Don't let me do it.
It's a nice one-off.
Now, I know that people had issues with its writing, but I want to say that the worst offender for this was that particular scene where they do use Ace's nitro sweets when they're being taken away in one of the military vans. And Ace says, not good bonbons, because the Doctor looks a bit sad with him. It queried Ace, spitting out her own sweet. Bernice appeared to be examining hers thoughtfully. No, better boom booms. And then they flung them to blow up the wall. And I was just like, I don't know. That was, I think, the worst pun I have read.
Yeah.
In any written word. I don't know. It just got to me, that one. I was like, right, come on. We're needing better patter from the TARDIS crew here to do this.
And Benny's sitting going, oh, what's this? Basically sums up Benny for the entire book. Benny's whole role all the way through it was to go, you're right, Ace. The Doctor's got a point. Oh, what does this button do? That was
the first, I think, thing I've noticed about was the amount of times whenever a discussion is happening between, say, the Doctor and someone else, or Ace and someone else, and Benny's just kind of there to be like, oh yeah, why did you do. For any questioning that takes place between any other people, but Benny is just there awkwardly to be like the amplifier of what has just been said to fill out the words.
Yep.
This is only on the calendar 9 months after Love and War. Depending on how long the commissioning process was, my guess is that the original outline featured classic series Ace and predates Benny. So Benny may have been shoehorned in here without a lot of plot function. That's more a function of when the book was commissioned and written and came out. If it had come out a year later, I think he would have been able to integrate Benny a lot.
Yeah, they managed to just find in the last few books. I get your point. I don't disagree, but I think different authors are probably adapted differently to the
Yeah.
mandates that were thrust upon them. I think it's probably the best way of putting it. Yeah, sorry. So that's me agreeing with
Yeah.
you, Jason. Sorry.
It's not an excuse for Bulis. It's more of a justification than
Yeah.
an excuse. I'm not excusing him.
Hmm.
I will say that Bulis, as you read the other 10 of his books, he has a definite style of novel. He likes to write books where you land in a place and it's paradoxical and it doesn't make sense. And there's a big twist about 3/4 of the way through where you learn the entire situation is a lie and you thought X was going on, but it's really Y.
Mm.
This book doesn't have that at all. So this is not classic Bulis. It's definitely not one of his best books. He'll do much more clever things later on. But as a first novel, again, it's got first novel issues, but this is what made the New Adventures the New Adventures. You have excited authors writing for the first time, doing whatever they want. Nobody's saying you can't do this. Nobody's stopping them. It's more traditional than some of the other books, but it's also pretty radical and experimental in other ways. And it gave us 10 more years of Bulis as an author. So there are some problems with it, but I'm not willing to trash the book just because there's pacing problems and bad prose. Bulis definitely learns from the experience and becomes
Oh,
a much better author in the years to come. We don't get that without this
no,
book
and
first.
it's as I said earlier on, I don't hate it. It's not a bad book. Although if you read through some of the literature attached to it, I mean, the guys that wrote Bookworm, are going, this is why the pit isn't the worst new adventure, and it's like that feels quite harsh to me. It's I didn't enjoy it, I didn't get into it,
Yeah.
but at no point was I going, the hell am I reading? It was just there.
Yeah. No,
And listen,
exactly.
Well-
Yeah. It was not that level of like actually and painful to read. I find my interest waning reading it, but it does not make it the worst thing ever in that way. It's just not for me. And I think, that sort of thing in particular about the joy of freedom that folk have with this range is the good thing. Because, I mean, this is the thing. This is what, if you discount White Darkness, maybe the 5th, 6th book that's set within that sort of future history period in terms of that multi-centuries in the future, but in that particular space, as it were, of that time. And having that deliver so many different results is really interesting. Like, if Peter Dove Evans is saying, right, you're setting these books in the 2500s or whatever it is, and you all come up with different things like this. Like, you've got something about duplicates and, in one corner of it with a sentient asteroid for this book. If you've got something like a planet with angels and all of the corporate greed stuff of Lucifer Rising. If you've got transit doing its thing, you've got all these things that are providing different results with the same kind of freedoms, but the same baseline of you're setting them roughly in this place. Go and see what you can do with it. So I do find that side of it kind of interesting for this period. I think he was maybe wanting to replicate basically the early 70s of having, your unit in the stars, almost, by having, you have your one place and time period to work with, but you come up with so many different results as part of that with the early 70s stuff. With, these books, the past 5-6 books or so, bar White Darkness, you have been coming up with so many different ideas and takes on the same sort of time period within, this canon, which I think is always good to explore.
Something else I like about Bulis is that there are some continuity references in this book. There's a callback to Frontier in Space. There's obviously the little William Hartnell cameo. But this is an original story with Bulis' own characters and an original bad guy. We are coming up on a time in the New Adventures where the next 7 books are very continuity heavy. And when you get to the alternate universe cycle, which spans 1993 into 1994, you have 5 straight books that are a sequel to a particular classic series adventure. So this for the longest time, is going to be the last wholly original book that you get that does not require an encyclopedic knowledge of Doctor Who. So if too much continuity is bad for you, this book is kind of like your last stop before a very long, hard road to hoe. That being said, I love the alternate universe cycle. Love it. So for me, that wasn't a problem. But if you like original stories, this definitely original.
Yeah, it's 10 out of 10 for effort, yes.
Yeah. It's definitely original, like we say, it's original with how it proposes that it's ingredients that are ingredients we may have seen in other places. Just perhaps showing them and how you present them is how I think he shows promise with, my favourite thing in this, for example, was the shadow forms, and just how enrapturing they were. Maybe not the image of the Doctor going all sort of like Ghostbustery with a big sort of like fiery gun thing that was kind of, grounding him, and with the big gloves. I was like, yeah, maybe not him being a Ghostbuster, but like I did like what the shadow form was.
I worked for Tennant.
It did it work for Tennant? I don't know if it did, but but I think the idea of that, in terms of what it was quite an interesting idea. That indeed, let's just say Stephen Moffat nicked from Shadowmind. But yeah,
and I think I've said this before, but I would much rather read a book where the author is trying something and not quite getting it than isn't trying and isn't being original, isn't pushing themselves. Mm-hmm. So, from that point of view, there's 1,001 great ideas in here that maybe don't work for me, but he has brought everything to the table and he is trying to be different. And yeah, that's fine. Go for that. And not every one of these books is going to hit for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's what you keep talking about, Jason. You're right. It was a bunch of new authors, pretty much untried, very untested, and the hit rate was phenomenal. So if this is considered a not quite a hit, he still put everything out there on the table. And it's... You can tell I don't do sports metaphors, can't you? But he tried. There was an effort. It wasn't the same old. He was trying to do something new. And that gets kudos for me.
And for my money, Doctor Who works best when young people are in charge. Verity Lambert, late 20s. Waris Hussein, late 20s. A lot of the best directors of the Hartnell era were young Turks. Douglas Camfield, Derek Martinez, Michael Imeson, Michael Ferguson. These are all people in their 20s and 30s ignoring tradition and doing whatever they want. And sometimes you have spectacular failures, but I'd rather have a spectacular failure than a dull, safe retread. Now, Alasdair, I pulled out my copy of Bookworm last night when I finished the book, and I hadn't read it in a while. I'd forgotten how harsh Stacey and Anthony are on this book. And I've known Stacey since Records Doctor Who in the early 90s, and she's always said over and over again, Doctor Who can survive being bad, but it can never survive being boring. And Stacey thought this book was boring. I don't think this book is boring, but I've read a lot of techno thrillers. I knew exactly what vibe he was going for. I was interested by it, and there are certainly new adventures that are much more dull than this one, which perhaps is faint praise, but I don't agree with Stacey's assessment of this book. I would have given it a much higher mark than she and Anthony did in Bookworm.
I wouldn't say that I perhaps agreed that it, of their assessment collectively being maybe one of the worst things ever, but there were passages of certain chapters that I was skimming because either in terms of the prose style, I like mainly the space battles, it's just not a thing for me. I get what it is doing, so therefore I don't really need more of it again. 100 pages in of it, and sometimes some of the dialogue it was almost like Big Finish dialogue sometimes, like how they have to describe what they're seeing rather than the books, the actual book just describing what we're seeing, and I'm like, this ought to just be the text rather than the dialogue sometimes, and I just took in instead what was being written for the pretext of the scene rather than some of the dialogue sometimes like that, which just felt a bit too obvious for the characters in the scene to make others hear and be aware of what's been described instead of, what we what we can also read. Did I find this worse than the pit? I don't think I did. I don't think I got through it. It took a longer time to get through it, but it was not worse than the pit.
The Pit is nihilistic. The Pit is a book about hell. It's a book about the destruction of an entire solar system, and it's a book where the Doctor kneels down before the Time Lord bad guy at the end, which on Rec Arts rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Although it's funny that Stacy in Bookworm is actually charitable towards the Pit, much more than she is towards Shadowmind. This book is not nihilistic. This book is an enlightened military. They're talking it out. They're not just out to destroy. As far as sergeants go in Doctor Who, Santoni is a very good sergeant. He's not burly as most Doctor Who sergeants tend to be. He's very competent, and his death is a tragedy. And except for the last 10 pages where Ace suddenly has to kill everybody, it's actually a very sympathetic look towards the men and women who make up the military, the way that you would find in a Tom Clancy. It's not an anti-war book, and it's got an enlightened cast of characters. That, I think, separates it out from the Pit. It's not quite as dark and as ominous, and it doesn't have an ending where the Doctor caves in and tells the bad guy, okay, you can get away with it.
Yeah. And it has more positivity in aspects, and that's maybe what's drawing me to not say it's worse than the Pit, was I genuinely was enjoying that optimistic offset within the beginning. Having our TARDIS crew just having a nice time. It felt like such a welcome reprieve to what we have been having as the more bleak, more guilt-ridden sort of tone for a lot of the books in the past wee while. And this helped try to just lessen that burden a bit. Maybe not near the end, but at the very much near the beginning. And that side I can at least enjoy. Now, I guess maybe just to sum up, any final words you might have about the book itself. I would just say I probably would not recommend it, however, despite what I say there about it not being as bad as The Pit, that doesn't mean that it's something I would be picking up again. There are probably more Doctor Who books out there that I would rather pick up. If you do want a nice palate cleanser, like I say, maybe read the first few chapters of this, just to see people feel like they're having a nice time, if you ever feel that as a bit of a Debbie Downer in any of these Doctor Who novels. But yeah, overall, maybe not one I'm going to pick up again. Alasdair, what about yourself?
Very similar. I mean, everyone that's read these books has a list of books that will recommend to people, and they'll have a list of books that will say, don't touch this, it's not good, it'll damage you. And that's Time Worm Genesis, that is The Pit, it is not Shadowmind. It is... Shadowmind did absolutely fine. It's not... People aren't going to suddenly not read this whole line because of Shadowmind, whereas they might not read it because of The Pit or because of Time Worm Genesis. It's fine.
Jason,
what's your final feeling on it?
So, Anthony, you said something that I agree with. This is not the book you pick up. Again, from 1991 until 1998, when I finished reading the original 61 New Adventures, The Dying Days, these books were everything to me because I was on Rec Arts Doctor Who. I was able to communicate with the authors. I became friends with some of the authors. I got my name in a couple of the later books, which was a very nice feeling, by the way. But I was into these books every time a new book came out. It was an event every month, and you read it as fast as you can, go to Rec Arts Doctor Who, and you discuss it. Shadowmind is not one of the books that I read over and over again. Love and War I read every year or two. Transit, I think I've read 3 times, and I'm much more charitable towards it than Anthony, but we'll save that debate for hopefully my next appearance. I don't recall if I read Shadowmind after that initial August 1993 purchase before today. I'm positive this is probably only the second time that I've read it, whereas the next 7 books after this, the Birthright Iceberg Duology, and then the 5 books in the alternate universe cycle. Those 7 books I've read at least 2 or 3 times each, and in the case of Hummingbird, probably 7 or 8 times. So the New Adventures were a tremendous part of my life in my late teens and for most of my 20s. As far as Shadowmind goes, I've been charitable to it on this recording, and I like trying to pick out what Bulis' influences are, and I think there's some really good potential in here. I do think it is one of the weaker books of the year, and the fact that I have not read it, as much as I've read some of the earlier and later books, is sort of an indictment. This is not a shining example. This is not a top tier new adventure. This is probably somewhere in the 3rd quadrant if you rank all the books in order from best to worst. This is probably somewhere in the mid 30s to high 40s. So I'm not here to say this is the best new adventure ever written, but I think as Bulis' first book, it shows you what he can do, and he is going to do much better things over the next decade. So yeah, I enjoyed reading this book again. I'm very thankful to you guys, Anthony and Alasdair, for giving me the chance to read it again and think about it in a critical sense so I can discuss it with you. But it is not one of the best, and I'm not here to say that it is one of the best. It's good for what it is, but as far as the NAs go, not on the top tiers.
Yeah.
Fair.
No, and wait, it's been great to have you on as well. And now, usually, this is a section where we actually would hear from you on our comments and what people would write into us. So we actually didn't get many comments. I think this is one of the least commented, ones that we've had. I'll just maybe kick off first with what we got over on Facebook. So we got Tim the Time Lord, who said a very odd one, some high points, including authorities actually willing to work with a doctor, and that very graphic confrontation near the end. The rest is a very by-the-numbers trudge through an adventure with an uneven world building, a raft of characters who don't get enough time or space to develop, and a two-dimensional performance by the crew, and one utterly crap villain. Mainly forgettable, unremarkable, and dull. So... Yeah,
I wouldn't say he's far off. That's a pretty fair assessment. A little harsher than I was, but I think it's fair.
True. Next, we've got Neil Cameron, who Neil is part of our Glasgow Doctor Who club, and we saw promoted locally a Doctor Who quiz in Glasgow, a very rare thing in any pub to be had in Glasgow. It turned out it was the week before, and we came to their last quiz of the year. So me, Neil, and some pals sat round and very much failed at the quiz that was put in front of us because it was not the quiz we thought. We were hoping a Doctor Who quiz was there, but it was not. Anyway, Neil says, it needed another edit. Too many spaceship battles. It fails to be Doctor Who and ends up being not very a good sci-fi novel. Ace becomes very one-dimensional, and on the whole comes a crossover poor invasion of the Body Snatchers meets Quatermass 2, which, again, like we're talking of influences, Quatermass 2 actually is also another one on the ball, I would say.
I like that.
Finally, on Facebook, I have Andy Hicks, who says, I've never read it. But here's his comment anyway. One day at Pandemonium, at one of its many Harvard Square locations, I was picking out a book, and it came down to either this or Birthright. Birthright had a weird insect-headed man on the cover, and Ace and Benny in a madcap Edwardian Jack the Ripper potboiler, whereas this appeared to have space people doing something on a planet, and I was a weird 13-year-old. I went with Birthright and wound up devouring on a family trip. So we have at least his thoughts on Birthright. But by judging a book on its cover, he did not choose Shadowmind.
Andy is a very good friend of mine from the Northeast Doctor Who convention circuit in the States. And when you ask me where you can find me online, I'll mention him again in a few minutes. But I suspect Andy was weighing into that thread only because I was there first. That's my suspicion.
Could well have been. Alasdair, do we have some folk over on Blue Sky?
Yeah, we do. We've got Alex Wilcock, another familiar name. We know Alec. And the new adventures made such an impact on me. Some expanded my horizons, some I recoiled from, Some gave me a love and passion that lasts to this day. I can remember who I was staying with and where I read Shadowmind. I can remember the weather. I reread the entire set a few years later, so I know I must have read it twice. I am ashamed to say I'm ashamed to have to admit that Shadowmind is the one solitary NA where I can remember nothing of what I thought about it. Yep, we'll give him that one. Hector Keaton starts really well, but as soon as the main plot begins, it drags due to too much time spent planning out and moving between locations. Also, when they actually carry out the plan they spent too many pages explaining, you know that it is wrong due to Ace's side plot. And possibly my favourite comment we've ever had, squirrels. That's it, just squirrels.
Squirrels.
Sorry,
Very true. I mean,
that's from Richard Flowers. Thank you, Richard.
Yes. Thank you for the succinction of that, because it sums it quite well. Actually, I never touched on it, but I really enjoyed them. I enjoyed those little sort of squirrel Ewok creatures that we had. Just solid creature building, I think, from that side at least.
I was going to say, in terms of influences, there's a little bit of Ursula Le Guin's The Word for World is Forest in here, with the little furry creatures with the telepathic nature.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, finally, this is the last few comments we've got. We have Herald of Creation, who said, aliens meet some turgid prose. I like a lot of Bulis. I like a lot of Bulis's work, but this feels like a struggle. And David Kitchen, who says, at the time I thought it was one of the weaker books, but basically a simple and reasonable space adventure. 30 years later, I can't say I remember much about it, which it seems not many can. Finally, on Instagram, we have GunsyNick69 saying, I'm about to start the new Book of Dust, so won't have a chance to reread before the podcast. And indeed, I have not received a last-minute message, unless I do over the weekend when I edit, which seems to be somehow when GunsyNick knows to comment.
And this is Editing Anthony just to say, no, GunsyNick69 has not commented in time of me editing the podcast.
My memory is that this is the definition of meh, and remember nothing about the details, sandwiched between two much more entertaining entries if memory serves, which, that is a fair thing. Says, cover didn't sell it to me back in the 90s, so I didn't get it. Still haven't read it. That's two people who judged a book by its cover and literally just didn't buy it. Like with this now.
Well, it's given its Bulis's covers a bit damning. It's poor soul.
Well, indeed. I'll leave the final comment about the cover to be the final comment, which is the one after this, which firstly we had 90s Doctor Who saying, it's tolerable. Some of the characters felt a bit generic though. But the final comment we had was indeed from Ian Christensen Illusion. Says, the cover, pretty good. The composition and figures are a bit exaggerated, so we can forgive the likenesses a bit. The lighting is excellent. No complaints there. Downside, the colour palette. Thought it was analogous. I can't even see it. Thought it was analogous, but there aren't enough tones in between. And not complementary between the green is closer to teal as well. Baffling. Now the book. I quite like this one. Positive points, it is lacking most of the egregious V&A-isms. There are a number of effective setups and payoffs, and the characters feel two-dimensional, at least functional. It does owe quite a bit to Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the first half and feels like a proto-Avatar in the second, with much of the same heavy-handedness, and most days I would be annoyed with that. But the thing that seals it for me is a question that I have been asking with a lot of these novels. Where are the scenes? By scenes, I mean single units in the fractal structure of the narrative where characters learn information, assimilate it, and then develop the story further through decisions. Other V&As, due to the lack of essential element of this, are about less story and more plot. Personally, I prefer the former to the latter. And that is one of his styles, which I did appreciate at some points, is he does a lot of punchy paragraphs, and I think we've had this before with certain of the writers, knowing when to use that. There are certain areas where I do think he overuses punchy paragraphs to just have changes into playing between, a lot of the scenes, but there's not a lot of that then building up to be a cohesive, structured, here's your whole chapter worth of, development payoff to that. But if we have anyone to defend, cover designs, Ian Christensen is the person to do it, because he is an illustrator, so who better to know if this cover is one that you should pick up or not if you judge a book by its cover. So, yeah, on that note, I think it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Jason, for joining us.
No, this has been a blast. Thank you for having me. The New Adventures is such a big part of my life from when they came out that when I heard you guys were covering them, I had to get involved, which is why I sent you that begging message over Facebook. Please have me on your show.
Well, no, it's been great to have you, and indeed, if people wish to listen to you or get in touch with you, where can they do so?
So I have 2 podcasts, and I am guesting on a third. I'll tell you what they are. Doctor Who Literature is my own personal project. I've been reading through the Target novelizations in publication order. I started that in November 2021. It is an offshoot of the pandemic. I was on hiatus for most of this year for work-related reasons, but I'm back now, and I'm up to the final season. I am covering the last 20 or so Target books. The next one up is Dragonfire, which is book number 137, and that is sort of a proto-New Adventure, so it's a very interesting book to talk about. And episodes are every Sunday. I release them in the morning UK time or Saturday night as I go to sleep here in the States. I have been fortunate enough on Doctor Who Literature to have a lot of the New Adventures authors on as guests. So in my archive, you will find John Peel, you will find Kate Orman, you will find Nigel Robinson. You will not find Christopher Bulis, who is pretty elusive, but he was a guest on Pieces of Eighth, the Eighth Doctor podcast, hosted by Kenny Smith, which I'm sure you know very well. Very interested to hear his voice for the first time. I am also a co-host on Trap One, which is a weekly Doctor Who podcast talking about any new bit of Doctor Who merchandise or TV episode. I was just the moderator of the episode covering parts 1 and 2 of The War Between the Land and the Sea, where I am not nearly as charitable and measured as polite as I've been over here for the last hour and 20 minutes. So Trap One has multiple rotating co-hosts. I am one of them. And then getting back to Andy Hicks, I have recently been on a non-Doctor Who podcast called The Comics Code. It's written and hosted by Graham Burke from the long-running Doctor Who podcast Reality Bomb. And it's covering the story of the creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and how they were built out of everything they were owed over a period of 40 years and how they finally got compensated for creating this billion-dollar property. It is a 7-episode podcast. It is the first season, hopefully lots more seasons to come. Andy Hicks was the editor of this season, the sound engineer, and my job is to play Jerry Siegel, one of the 2 creators of Superman. So any text from Jerry Siegel is performed by yours truly with the help of Graham, who curated the material and wrote the scripts, and Andy Hicks, the commenter who didn't read the book he was commenting on, because he is our sound designer. So if you want to hear me in a dramatic context, you can find Comics Code by Graham Burke wherever you get your podcasts.
Lovely stuff. Now, once again, thank you very much for joining us, Jason. And Alasdair, it's always great to see you. And we'll hope to see everyone next time in the new year with Birthright.
Yep, looking forward to it.
Hope to hear from you all soon. Flip my last night. Oh well. Thanks for listening to another episode of Too Broad and Too Deep. You can get in touch with us on social media at Too Broad Too Deep Pod, that's with the number 2, on Blue Sky, Twitter and Instagram. You can also contact our Facebook page, Doctor Who, Too Broad and Too Deep Podcast, and that's with the word 2. Or you can email us at toobroadtoodeeppod@gmail.com, and that's also with the word TOO. Hope to hear from you soon.